Have you ever done something completely innocent, something kind even, and watched it get twisted into the worst mistake of your life? Because that's exactly what happened to me. And by the time you understand the full picture, you're going to question everything. Your instincts, your judgment, maybe even the person sitting closest to you right now. Welcome back to Dad's True Revenge. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember, the people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You're going to love it here. My name is Shane Mercer. I'm 43 years old. I own a mid-sized logistics company in Phoenix, Arizona. I coach Little League on Saturdays. I tip well. I remember birthdays. And according to the state of Arizona, I tried to poison my wife with water. Let me take you back to the morning everything started. March 4th, a Tuesday, which is already suspicious because nothing good ever happens on a Tuesday. But I didn't know that yet. I woke up feeling like a man on top of the world. See, 3 months prior, I'd closed the biggest deal of my career, a merger that had taken 2 years, 4 law firms, and approximately 11,000 cups of coffee to pull off. The kind of deal that changes your last name from who to owe him. The final wire transfer had just cleared the night before. $100 million. Let me say that again for the people in the back. $100 million sitting in our joint account like it owned the place. Because it did. I remember standing in the kitchen that morning in my socks, phone in hand, staring at the number on the screen. My wife, Rebecca, Becca, I called her, came down the stairs in her silk robe, hair still messy from sleep, looking the way she always looked in the morning, like someone who knew exactly how beautiful she was. She poured herself a glass of orange juice and glanced at me over the rim. "You're smiling like an idiot," she said. "Come here," I told her. She walked over slow the way she did when she thought I was about to say something she'd have to pretend not to care about. I handed her my phone, watched her eyes scan the screen. She didn't gasp, didn't scream, didn't cry. Becca never did the thing you expected her to do. She just looked up at me, smiled slow, wide, the kind that reached her eyes, and said very quietly, "Well, there it is." I kissed her on the forehead, told her I loved her. She handed back my phone, picked up her juice, and walked toward the living room like I'd just shown her a mildly interesting YouTube video. That was Becca, cool as a marble floor. I followed her in, and she was already curled up on the couch, flipping through something on her tablet. I sat beside her, and we talked. Really talked the way we used to when we first got married, before the company swallowed most of my waking hours. We talked about the vacation we'd keep postponing. Italy maybe, or Portugal. She'd been to Portugal once before she met me, and never shut up about the bread there. We talked about finally renovating the kitchen. We talked about what it meant, not just the money, but the proof that the sacrifices had been worth it. And somewhere in the middle of all that talking, I reached over and grabbed her hand and told her, "None of this means anything without you in it." She squeezed my hand, said, "I know. Now before I go any further, I need to introduce you to someone." Her name was Dolores. She'd been our housekeeper for about 8 months. Quiet woman, mid-50s, efficient in a way that made you feel slightly judged even when she wasn't looking at you. She showed up every weekday at 8 a.m., never a minute late, never a minute early, and she moved through our house like a ghost, present, but invisible, the way good housekeepers somehow managed to be. I liked Dolores. She made excellent coffee, and she never asked unnecessary questions. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that Dolores had decided somewhere along the way that my wife was dangerous. Not cold, not difficult, not the kind of woman you'd describe as a lot. Dangerous. And she'd been watching quietly for months. Back to Tuesday later that afternoon, Becca suggested we celebrate. Nothing elaborate, just a nice dinner at home. She'd have Dolores prepare something, open a good bottle of wine, make it an evening. I said that sounded perfect. Dolores cooked a lamb roast with roasted vegetables, the kind of meal that makes you feel like a person of taste, just for eating it. Becca set the table herself, which she almost never did, lighting candles and finding the good napkins from wherever good napkins disappear to in large houses. We sat down. It was genuinely lovely. I remember thinking, this is it. This is the version of life you work toward. Then Becca stood to get water from the kitchen. She came back with 2 glasses, set mine in front of me, and settled back into her seat with a smile. "To us," she said, raising hers. "To us," I said, and I picked up my glass. That's when Dolores appeared. She came around the corner from the hallway, not from the kitchen, the hallway which struck me as slightly odd, because she had no reason to be in the hallway. She was supposed to be cleaning up in the back, but she was there, hovering near my shoulder with a basket of dinner rolls. She almost certainly didn't need to deliver personally, and as she set them on the table, she leaned just slightly toward me, close enough that only I could hear. She whispered, "Don't drink it. Swap the glasses," 4 words, barely a breath. Then she straightened up, said, "Enjoy your dinner," in her normal voice, and walked back toward the kitchen like she hadn't just detonated a bomb in the middle of my chest. I sat there. Becca was talking. Something about Portugal again, I think, or maybe the kitchen renovation, and her glass was already raised halfway to her lips before she got distracted by something on her phone. And I looked at my glass. I want you to understand something about that moment. I wasn't thinking clearly. I wasn't thinking at all. I was operating on pure instinct, the animal kind, the kind that bypasses logic entirely and goes straight from stimulus to action. So I switched them smoothly, casually, the way you'd reach across a table for the salt. Becca didn't look up. She was laughing at something on her screen, showing it to me, and I leaned in to look. And just like that, her glass was at my place. My glass was at hers. Simple. Done. Harmless, I thought. We ate. We laughed. We talked about Italy again. I'd shifted to Italy by then. I wasn't feeling Portugal. And then Becca picked up the glass, my old glass, her new one, and took a long sip. I watched her. She swallowed, set the glass down, and then something shifted in her face. Not dramatically, not the way it happens in movies where someone clutches their throat and knocks the candles over. It was subtle. Her brow furrowed slightly. She touched her collarbone, blinked twice in quick succession. "You okay?" I asked. "I'm fine," she said. "Just I feel a little strange." And then she wasn't fine. Within 60 seconds she was gasping, her eyes wide, one hand gripping the edge of the table hard enough to whiten her knuckles. "Shane," she managed. I was already on my feet. I called 911. I was yelling into the phone and kneeling beside her and telling her to stay with me. And the candles were still burning, and the lamb was still warm on the table. And somewhere in the back of the house, Dolores heard everything. Every word, every sound, every desperate second of it, and she said nothing. She just stood in that hallway and watched. Becca survived. That part I'll tell you now, because the story isn't about whether she lived. 3 days later, a detective named Harris sat across from me in a gray room and slid a photograph across the table. A still frame from our dining room security camera, and pointed at the exact moment my hand crossed the table and moved that glass. He looked at me with the specific tiredness of a man who thinks he's already solved the case. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "want to tell me why you switched your wife's drink?" And I realized sitting in that chair that the truth, the whole simple, innocent truth, was the most unbelievable thing I could possibly say. If you've made it this far, do us one quick favor. Subscribe. A lot of people watch without ever doing it, but it costs you nothing and means everything to us. Thank you genuinely. Here's something nobody tells you about being innocent. It doesn't feel the way you think it will. You'd assume innocence feels like solid ground, like something you can stand on, point to, say, "Here, this is where I'm standing. Come look." But it doesn't. Innocence, when nobody believes it, feels exactly like guilt. It has the same weight, the same temperature, the same way of making a room feel smaller than it actually is. I know that now. I learned it in a gray room on a Thursday morning, sitting across from a detective who'd already made up his mind before he finished his coffee. His full name was Detective Carl Harris. Broad shoulders, thinning hair, the kind of mustache that exists purely out of stubbornness. He had a yellow legal pad in front of him that he barely wrote on, which told me he wasn't gathering information. He was building a case. "Mr. Mercer," he said, sliding that photograph across the table for the second time, as if maybe I hadn't seen it clearly the first time. "Let's try this again." The photo was time-stamped, 7:42 p.m. You could see my hand, the glass, the exact arc of the movement. In still frame, with zero context, it looked like the most deliberate thing a person had ever done. "I switched the glasses," I said. "I already told you that." "You did?" Harris nodded slowly like a man who respected patience and had plenty of it. What I'm still waiting on is a reason that makes sense. The housekeeper told me to. He wrote something on the pad. First thing he'd written since we sat down. Dolores Vega, he said. Yes, who according to her own statement was in the back of the house during dinner and didn't come into the dining room at any point during the meal. I felt the floor shift under me, not dramatically, just slightly, the way it does before something collapses. That's not true, I said. She's pretty certain. Then she's lying. Harris leaned back in his chair and looked at me the way school teachers look at kids who've given an answer that's technically creative, but fundamentally wrong. Mr. Mercer, your wife is in the hospital. The preliminary talk screen came back this morning. He paused just long enough to make sure I was paying attention. There was a sedative compound in her system. High concentration, the kind that doesn't get there by accident. The room went very quiet. That wasn't in the water, I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. That had to have come from something else. The food, the wine, something. The food and wine both came back clean. Then, I don't know how it got there, but I didn't put it there. But you switched the glasses because Dolores told me to. Who says she wasn't in the room? He said it without a question mark, just laid it there on the table between us like a stone. And I had nothing, no other witness, no audio, just a security camera that had caught my hand, and a housekeeper who had apparently decided sometime between Tuesday night and Thursday morning that none of it had happened. They let me go that afternoon. No arrest, not yet. But Harris shook my hand at the door with the specific courtesy of a man who wants you to know the door isn't far. I drove home in a fog so thick I almost missed my own exit. The house felt different when I walked in. Bigger somehow, emptier. The dining room table still had a faint ring where one of the wine glasses had sat, and I stood there staring at it for a full minute before I caught myself. I needed to think more than that. I needed to find Dolores. I called her that evening 4 times straight to voicemail each one. Her outgoing message was professional. Clipped the voice of a woman who did not invite small talk. You've reached Dolores. Leave a message. I left one. Dolores, it's Shane Mercer. I need you to call me back tonight, please. Whatever reason you have for saying what you said to the police. I need you to talk to me first. Please. I hung up and sat on the edge of my bed in the dark for a long time. Then I did the thing every rational adult does when they're running out of options. I started Googling. Now listen, I want you to stay with me here because this is where the story stops being about a glass of water and starts being about something much stranger. I typed in her full name, Dolores Vega, Phoenix, Arizona. I wasn't expecting much. Maybe a Facebook page or a LinkedIn profile that confirmed she was exactly who she said she was. What I found instead was a forum post on a neighborhood watch website. The kind with the terrible, early 2000s layout that makes you feel like you've traveled back in time from about 11 months ago. Posted anonymously, but the details were specific enough to make my stomach turn. The post described a woman mid-50s housekeeper, meticulous, quiet, who had apparently become convinced that her previous employer's wife was trying to harm him. The poster described months of the housekeeper making small comments, moving things around the house, watching the wife, creating what the poster called an atmosphere of paranoia in an otherwise normal home. The previous employer had eventually let her go. Not because she'd done anything criminal, but because in his words, and I'm paraphrasing here, she started to feel less like an employee and more like a security detail nobody had hired. The post didn't name her, but the timeline fit perfectly. She would have started working for us about 2 months after that family let her go. I read it 3 times. Then I sat back and asked myself the question I should have asked 8 months ago when she first walked through my door. What exactly do I know about Dolores Vega? The answer I discovered over the next 24 hours was almost nothing. The agency we'd hired her through, Prestige Home Staffing, very fancy name for what was essentially a website and a phone number, confirmed her employment history only as far back as 2 years. Before that, nothing. Her references were real people, but when I called both of them personally, one hadn't heard from her in years and seemed faintly surprised to learn she'd used them at all. The other number had been disconnected. I called my lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia Cole, who charged $400 an hour and was worth every cent. I told her everything, the whisper, the glass switch, Harris, the forum post, the references. She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "Shane, I need you to tell me something honestly." "Okay, is there any reason your wife would want to hurt you?" "No, you're sure, Patricia." I handed her $100 million 4 hours before this happened. Another pause. Right. Okay, I could hear her writing. Then we need to find out who Dolores Vega actually is, because right now she's the only other person in that house. She's contradicted your statement and whatever she put in that water. Shane, her voice dropped half a register. If she whispered to you not to drink it, what does that tell you? I opened my mouth, closed it because she was right. I'd been so consumed by the question of why Dolores lied to the police that I hadn't circled back to the first question, the one that should have been obvious from the start. If Dolores knew the water was dangerous, how did she know? I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I lay in the bed that felt too wide without Becca in it and stared at the ceiling and turned that question over and over in my mind like a coin I couldn't stop flipping. How did she know? Option 1, she'd seen something, witnessed Becca do something to the glass in the kitchen. But if that were true, why lie to the police? Why not just say that? Option 2, she'd been watching Becca for a long time, building a case in her own head, the way that forum post suggested she'd done before. And the compound in the water had nothing to do with Becca at all. It had come from somewhere else, someone else, a contamination nobody had yet explained, and Dolores had whispered to me based on suspicion alone. Or option 3, the one I didn't want to look at directly. Option 3 was that Dolores hadn't warned me because she'd seen something. She'd warned me because she knew something, because she'd put it there herself. I was at the hospital the next morning by 7 o'clock. Becca was sitting up in bed, pale but present, an IV in her left arm, and the specific irritation of a woman who did not enjoy being confined to small spaces with bad lighting. She looked at me when I walked in the way she always looked at me, assessing, warm, slightly amused. All at once. "You look terrible," she said. "You're in a hospital bed," I said. "I don't think you're in a position to critique appearances." She almost smiled. "Did they tell you what was in the water?" "A sedative. High concentration." She nodded slowly, looking at her hands. "I don't understand it," she said quietly. "I got the glasses myself. I filled them from the filter in the kitchen. I sat them down and came to the table." She looked up at me. "Shane, I don't understand how." "I know," I said. "I believe you." And I did. I want to be clear about that. Whatever else was happening, whatever tangled mess was unraveling around us, I looked at my wife in that hospital bed, and I believed her completely, which meant there was only one other person. I was walking back to my car across the hospital parking lot, phone already in hand to call Patricia when it rang first. "Unknown number," I answered anyway. Silence for a moment, then her voice. Quiet, careful. The same voice that had leaned into my ear 4 nights ago and changed everything. "Mr. Mercer," Dolores said, "I think we need to meet." I stopped walking. "Why did you lie to the police?" "Dolores," a pause. "Because I panicked." "About what?" Another pause, longer this time. And when she spoke again, her voice had changed. The professional composure was gone. What was underneath it was something I hadn't expected. She sounded afraid, because when I went back to the kitchen after dinner, she said slowly, "I found something. Something that tells me this is much bigger than either of us understands." The parking lot felt very open, suddenly very exposed. "What did you find?" I asked. She said, "Not on the phone, in person, tomorrow morning. And Mr. Mercer," she stopped, drew a breath. "Come alone, and don't tell your wife." The call ended. I stood there in the Arizona sun, cars moving slowly past me, the world carrying on completely unbothered, and I had absolutely no idea who to trust anymore. If you've been listening for a while and want stories like this to keep coming, it really helps if you hit that like button and subscribe. 97% of people never do, but it's what keeps this whole thing running. So thank you for real. Let me tell you something about the truth. People talk about it like it's this clean, noble thing, like it arrives wrapped in light. Everything makes sense, and justice prevails, and somebody rolls credits. That is not how the truth works. The truth, in my experience, arrives messy, inconvenient, and occasionally sitting across from you in a corner booth at a Denny's off Route 17 at 7 in the morning, stirring creamer into bad coffee, like she hasn't completely upended your entire life. That's where Dolores chose to meet. A Denny's. I'd been accused of poisoning my wife, and the woman at the center of it wanted to meet at a place that still served a Grand Slam breakfast. I almost respected it. I got there first, took the booth furthest from the door, back to the wall, facing the entrance, which I'd like to say was tactical, but mostly I just didn't want anyone sneaking up on me. I'd had enough of that for 1 week. She walked in at 7:02. Same Dolores, navy cardigan, sensible shoes, hair pulled back so severely it looked like a lifestyle choice, but something was different about her. The precision was still there, but the composure underneath it had hairline cracks running all the way through. She sat down across from me without a greeting, folded her hands on the table, looked at me. "Thank you for coming alone," she said. "I almost didn't come at all." I told her, "You lied to the police, Dolores. You told them you weren't in the dining room. Do you understand what kind of position that puts me in? Then explain it to me, because I have a lawyer who is about 48 hours away from making your name very public, and I would genuinely like to understand what's happening before that train leaves the station." She looked down at her hands, unfolded them, refolded them, and then she said something I was not prepared for. "I've been watching your wife for 6 months. The waitress appeared, asked if we wanted anything. I ordered coffee I didn't need. Dolores shook her head. We waited for the waitress to leave, watching her. "How?" I asked carefully. She said, "Mr. Mercer, I need you to understand something about me before I explain. I know what people say. I know there was a family before you, the Hendersons, over in Scottsdale. And I know Gerald Henderson asked me to leave because he thought I was paranoid." She paused. He was wrong. His wife was stealing from him, skimming from the household accounts, small amounts, consistently for 2 years. I saw it. I tried to tell him. He didn't believe me, and I left. Another pause. They divorced 14 months later. She took a significant settlement. I washed her face. She wasn't performing. She wasn't building toward anything theatrical. She was just laying out facts the way someone does when they've been carrying them alone for too long. "Okay," I said carefully. "Go on." What she told me over the next 40 minutes rearranged everything. 6 months ago, not long after I'd begun the final push on the merger, Dolores had noticed something on a Tuesday afternoon while cleaning the upstairs office. The office I rarely use because most of my work happened at the company headquarters downtown. Becca used it occasionally for personal admin. She told me once, bills, correspondence, whatever. Dolores had found tucked inside a hardcover book on the second shelf, the kind of hiding place that only works if nobody's thorough, a printed series of emails. She didn't take them, didn't photograph them. She was, she told me, with something close to pride, not a thief, but she read them carefully, and what they contained was a correspondence between Becca and a man named, and she said this slowly, watching my face, Douglas Mercer, my younger brother, the one I hadn't spoken to in 4 years, the one who tried to contest our father's will and lost. The one who blamed me specifically and loudly for a legal outcome I hadn't engineered. The one who had at our last conversation looked me in the eye at a funeral and said, "You'll regret this, Shane." I hadn't thought about Douglas in months. Apparently he'd been thinking about me. "What were the emails about?" I asked. My voice was very quiet. "A plan," Dolores said simply, "to contest your company's ownership structure. Your brother had apparently found a lawyer, someone in Chicago, who believed there was grounds to challenge the original partnership agreement from when your father helped fund the startup. Something about undisclosed terms." She looked at me steadily. "The merger would complicate that significantly. 100 million changes the math on any legal challenge." I sat back. "That's why Becca had them," I said. Not a question. I was just working through it out loud. She was building a case, researching, figuring out if Douglas had a real shot. "Or coordinating with him," Dolores said quietly. I looked at her. She held the look. "The last email in the sequence, Mr. Mercer. I've thought about it every day since I read it. Your brother wrote, and I'm telling you this as precisely as I can recall. He wrote that the cleanest solution would be if the merger never cleared at all. And beneath that, in your wife's handwriting, she'd annotated the printed copy. She'd written 2 words. She stopped. "What 2 words?" I asked. "I know. I want to pause right here because I know what you're thinking. You're thinking so Becca was in on it. Shane's wife, and his brother were working together. The water was poisoned deliberately, and she was the one who did it. I thought the same thing for about 30 seconds. Then I thought about it for real. Becca was the one who drank the water. She hadn't known I'd switched the glasses. If she'd poisoned my glass, she would never have touched hers. She'd have had a reason to avoid it. A headache, a sudden distaste for water, something. But she picked it up without a second thought, and drank it and ended up in a hospital bed, which meant either she had nothing to do with the compound in the water, or she was the greatest actress in the history of the American Southwest. So if Becca didn't put the sedative in the glass, I said slowly, and I obviously didn't. I looked at Dolores. She looked back at me. Dolores, I panicked. She said again, but her voice had changed. That's not an answer. A long silence. The Denny's hummed around us, plates clattering, somebody's kid complaining about eggs, classic American morning chaos. And in the middle of all of it, Dolores closed her eyes briefly and said, I put it in your glass. The room didn't change. The noise continued. The kid was still upset about the eggs. You put it in my glass, I repeated. A mild sedative enough to make you feel unwell enough to slow things down. Give me time to confront your wife about what I'd found. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I was trying to. She stopped, pressed her fingers against her lips. I had become convinced that something was going to happen to you, that with the merger closing, your brother and your wife were going to move against you legally. And I thought if I could just slow the evening down, talk to her myself. You put a sedative in my drink, I said again, still quiet, still very calm actually, which surprised me. And then, you told me not to drink it because I changed my mind, she said, and her voice cracked on the last word. I sat in that hallway and watched the two of you at that table, and you were laughing, and she looked at you like, and I thought, what am I doing? What have I done? So I warned you. I told you to switch them. I thought she'd just feel slightly drowsy. I didn't know she had a sensitivity. Her eyes were wet now, which was somehow the most unsettling thing I'd seen all week. I didn't know. I paid for the coffee I hadn't drunk. I drove to Patricia's office and sat across from her and told her everything. All of it, Douglas. The emails, Dolores, the sedative, the whole sprawling, ridiculous, impossible story. Patricia listened without interrupting, which was how I knew it was serious, because Patricia always interrupted. When I finished, she set down her pen and said, Okay, here's where we are. She laid it out with the clean efficiency of someone who'd untangled worse. Dolores had administered the compound. That was criminal. She would need her own lawyer. That was a separate matter. But her testimony about the emails, combined with a formal discovery process targeting Becca's correspondence with Douglas, would dismantle any suggestion that I'd acted with intent. The security footage showed a glass switch. Yes, it also showed a housekeeper leaning in to whisper something, which Dolores had lied about, which Patricia intended to make very loud very fast. And Douglas, I asked, depends what's in those emails. She looked at me over her glasses, but conspiring to destabilize a business merger based on a fraudulent challenge to a partnership agreement with documented coordination is the kind of thing that makes lawyers in Chicago very suddenly unavailable. And Becca Patricia was quiet for a moment. That, she said carefully, is a question only you can answer. The emails show she knew about Douglas's intentions, whether she was researching them to protect you or exploring them to hurt you. She paused. There's no crime in knowing something, Shane, not yet. I went to the hospital that afternoon. Becca was better. Color back in her face, ivy out, sitting up and eating what appeared to be the world's saddest cup of Jell-O, with the expression of a woman keeping her complaints internal. She looked up when I came in. I sat down, didn't say anything for a moment, just looked at her. Douglas has been contacting you, I said. She didn't flinch, didn't look away. She sat down the Jell-O and folded her hands in her lap and said, Yes. How long? And the emails? A pause. You went through my things. The housekeeper did. Long story, Becca. What does I know mean? At the bottom of his last email, his suggestion that the merger shouldn't clear. He wrote, I know next to it. She looked at me for a long moment, and then in the quiet voice she used when she was being completely uncomplicatedly honest, the voice I'd somehow forgotten she had, she said, It means I knew what he was doing. I was documenting it, Shane. I was going to take it to Patricia. when the merger closed and the timing was right. Her jaw tightened slightly. He's your brother. I didn't want to bring it to you until I had everything. I didn't want you to have to deal with it in the middle of the biggest deal of your career. The room was very quiet. You were protecting me, I said. I've been protecting you for 11 years. She said, did you really think I was going to stop now? I'm not going to tell you everything is resolved cleanly. That's not the story. Dolores was charged with administering a noxious substance. Her lawyer negotiated it down. Eventual probation, no prison time. She testified fully, and she told the truth. And I believe she genuinely thought she was protecting me in her own broken, misguided way. I don't entirely understand it, but I've stopped needing to. Douglas's legal challenge collapsed before it was formally filed. The lawyer in Chicago became very suddenly unavailable. Funny how that works. Detective Harris called me 3 weeks later to inform me that I was no longer a person of interest. He said it with the specific tone of a man who was not going to apologize, but wanted me to know he'd updated his opinion. I said, thank you, and meant it less than I've ever meant anything. And Becca came home on a Thursday, another Thursday, which I'm now choosing to believe is the universe correcting itself, and walked through the front door and stood in the kitchen, and looked around at the house that was too quiet and too big, and said, we're renovating this kitchen. Whatever you want, I said. She turned and looked at me. You believed me the whole time. Of course I did. Most people wouldn't have. I'm not most people, I said. I'm the guy who handed his wife $100 million on a Tuesday. She laughed. The real kind. The kind that reaches her eyes. And somewhere in that sound, in that completely ordinary, unremarkable kitchen on a Thursday afternoon, I felt the ground come back under my feet. Solid, finally, like something you can stand on, like the truth when it actually arrives. This has been The Glass Between Us, Shane Mercer's story. And the next time someone whispers something in your ear, maybe ask a few more questions before you act. If you like this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories.